So let's go ahead and pull up the ethics handout. Okay, ethics. Ethics is huge on the CPA exam, and it's not kind of the ethics you might think of it in like your other classes. Drawing here, it's not like any other classes. It's there's actually rules as far as what we need to do to be independent, and those are huge. Something like, it depends on how they split it up, but certainly it hovers around 15% of the CPA exam, which is a pretty good chunk of it. And this is one chapter in the book, so it's a very important chapter. It's a big chapter. It could easily be twice as long as we're going to spend on it, but we're going to spend a little extra time on this chapter just because it is so important. And it's one of those chapters that I can guarantee you there's going to be something on the CPA exam on it, and probably several things on the CPA exam about it. So ethics is basically, a big chunk of it comes from, it's really important, but basically because we're independent. As it says on the audit report, report of the independent auditors. So we're supposed to be independent. So that's what a big chunk of this chapter is about. Now it starts out with who needs to be independent. You have the CPA firm, and it's got all kinds of people in there. There's going to be partners and managers and seniors and associates and all that. But there's also going to be other people in there too. There's going to be lawyers. There's going to be people in the shipping department. There's going to be people in human resources. There's going to be all these other people. And so the question is, who needs to be independent when you're talking about writing an audit report? And basically, it comes down to people that could influence the audit report, people that could influence on the audit itself. So that's kind of like the overall thing. But there's some very stringent rules on it of who we actually hold accountable and what they're held accountable to. Okay, so we're going to start out. This is page 1. I don't know why I'm telling you. We're not going to start on page 6? No, all right. That's kind of weird. All right, so independent. So the one thing we need to talk about who are what they call covered members. And covered members are held to a higher standard than other people in professional. When they say covered members, they mean they're covered by the rules for independence for people who can influence the audit. So it's kind of a strange term, but covered members are people who can influence the audit. They're covered by the rules regarding independence. Okay, so audit firms are going to have a number of different offices, but this is the audit engagement office, or the attest office. Now, who has to be independent? Well, first of all, anyone who's doing the audit needs to be independent. So everybody here needs to be independent. Okay. So that one you probably assume, okay, that makes sense, that whoever's doing the audit, they have to be independent. Now, in the engagement office, whatever office is doing the audit, all the partners in the office must also be independent. So all the partners in that office need to be independent. Now, notice that these other people are not held to that same level. And this is where it comes into what we talked about in chapter 1 and 2, the chapters 1 and 2, the with the AICPA says that you have to put people into, one of these levels, and one of the reasons why is because of this independence thing. So even if your CPA firm isn't set up as, partner, manager, senior, associate, you have to somehow fit every job category for those auditors into one of those four. If you have 5 levels, you have to split into those. If you have 3 levels, you have to split them into those for whatever it is. You have to somehow, because the rules are written towards this model. Okay, so in the audit firm, in the audit office, I should say, the engagement office, everyone who is a partner needs to be independent. Everyone working on the audit needs to be independent. These other people, they have some rules, which we'll talk about later, but they're held to a lesser standard. Okay, now it's possible that they do some non-attest services, things like taxes and consulting and all that kind of stuff. In the non-attest services office, in this case, I guess I got it labeled as Denver. So here we got the Denver office. Oops. So non-attest. These are things like they could also have taxes. It could be in there. It could be any number of things. Any of the consulting stuff could be there too. But yeah, so these are not auditing. These are not auditing services. These are not attest. The partner and the manager only are going to be held to the higher levels. And these are the main categories that we're going to have for our determining whether they are independent. This is what they kind of focus on. So anyone in the audit engagement office who is a partner is a covered member. Anyone actually doing the audit is a covered member. When it comes to consulting, the partner and the manager need to be independent. They're both covered members. The rest of these, you'll notice, are not. So if you're doing the IBM audit and you're a senior, you must be independent. If you're doing IBM consulting and you're a senior, you don't need to be independent. Okay, so these are the basic rules. So these first 3 here, that's what we're talking about. And I should talk about the 10-hour people. 10-hour people. A strange name for somebody, but so 10 hours is, give me 1 second here. Sorry, I'm having a coughing fit here, so I'm trying to spare you that. So the data test people, if they're only must be covered members if they perform at least 10 hours worth of services in a year. So they get this kind of funny name of the 10-hour people. So when they talk about 10-hour people, they're talking about people who do consulting. So a lot of these things are like things like taxes and things like that. So for example, if someone calls up and has a tax issue and a partner in the consulting office spends a couple hours, bills a couple hours for whatever the tax issue is, they're not a covered member. They haven't done 10 hours worth of work. So you have to do 10 hours worth of work before you're considered a covered member. Now, if they did 20 hours of work, then yeah, they're a covered member. But they have to do at least 10 hours, and they usually talk about billable hours, 10 billable hours of work before they're considered before they have to follow the rules of being a covered member. Okay. All right. Now, there are some other people that we must consider. Basically, anyone who can influence the audit is considered a covered member. A senior partner, even though the senior partner may not even be in that office, if they have an oversight of the audit office, if they have oversight of it, they may very well be a covered member if they are anyway connected with that office. The CPA firm itself must be independent. So if we're auditing, say, IBM, the CPA firm must also be independent of IBM. So if they have a pension plan, they cannot have a material amount of that pension plan in IBM. And we'll talk about that, later. But so the CPA firm itself is also considered a covered member. And F is kind of a catch-all, and that is any entity that is controlled by covered members. It doesn't have to be controlled by a single covered member, but if it's controlled in total by covered members, then it is considered also a covered member. So for example, let's say that you get 5 partners together and they make an investment fund for themselves and they invest in IBM stock. Okay, that investment fund is controlled all by covered members, and if all 5 of those are covered members, then that's considered a covered member too, and they lack independence. So anything controlled by covered members is also considered a covered member. Now, any one of those partners or whatever could say, or covered members could say, "Oh wait, I don't control it. I only own 20% of it." But if in total it is controlled by covered members, then it's a covered member. It's considered itself to be a covered member. Now, if you have 5 people making investments and 2 of them are covered members, and it's they each have 20%, so they have a total of covered members have a total of 40%. That is not a covered member. It has to be a controlling amount, so over 50% to be a covered member. If it has less than that, if the covered members are less than that, then it is not considered a covered member. There are other rules that apply to that, but the entity itself is not considered a covered member. All right, that's a lot. Yeah. Yeah, so basically the audit team, the partners in that office, and the 10-hour people are usually who we focus on. These last 3, while they are covered members, they usually are not as likely to but they're usually not as likely to show up, say, on the CPA exam, and not as extensively anyway. A lot fewer of them, for one thing. Okay. So what do they have to do? What are the rules for direct financial interests? Okay, so covered members. Covered members cannot have any direct interest in the client. None. cannot own stocks, bonds, et cetera. I don't know. Let me take the et cetera out there. It probably covers most of it. So they cannot directly own stock or bonds issued by the client. Let me write that in there, directly. Okay, so if you're a covered member, you cannot have any direct interest in the client. You can't own any of their stocks, any of their bonds. You can't have any ownership interest. It's prohibited. Question on that? And again, this is, by the way, as going through here, this is for covered members only. Notice that everyone in green here is covered. People who are not green are not covered. But yeah, so this is, if you're a covered member, you can't have any direct interest. And okay, indirect financial interests. We'll talk about what these are in a minute here. Indirect financial interests. They can own indirect financial interest in the client if, I shouldn't say they. If the interests are immaterial. Okay, well, let's give some examples of what these are. Let's say a mutual fund. Okay, so let's say the Standard & Poor's 500 fund. I'm just going to make the. All right, so let's say you're auditing IBM. And IBM is part of the Standard & Poor's 100 fund. In other words, they take the top 100 companies from Standard & Poor's and they make that into a fund, and people buy into the fund. The fund will then buy the stock. So the way a fund works, the Standard & Poor's 500 fund, you actually buy shares into the fund. The fund will actually buy the shares of stock. So it's indirect. You're buying the fund, whatever the shares of the fund are, it's a financial instrument. You're buying the shares of the fund. The fund is then buying the shares of the stock. Now, Standard & Poor's 100 means that there's 100 other companies. There's 100 companies in it. So if you have IBM, there's 99 other companies in it. is probably immaterial. It's such a small part of the fund. Now, if there's a fund that has a large ownership of IBM, say, that would be a problem. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it could be almost any form, but generally speaking, is there's a disconnect between buying into the fund and the actual people who are managing the fund, who are purchasing the stock. A lot of times they'll do some kind of an index, and the Standard and Poor's funds are very common to have out there. That people just take the biggest 100 or 500 or whatever it is, um, and invest in those. And again, it's indirect. You're not actually buying IBM. You're buying into the fund. The fund is then investing. And also, it's got to be immaterial. So it can't be a large part of the fund, whatever that level is. We'll talk about it later, but so it's got to be indirect and immaterial. You own it. Okay. It could happen other ways too. Another way is you have, let's say, I'm gonna, I use IBM for almost everything here. So we put this here. Okay, let's say that we have Bank One. Bank One loans money to IBM. Okay, so you have a bank, and they loan money to IBM. Now you invest in the bank. The bank, however, loans money to IBM. They have an interest in IBM. Notice that it is not direct. Your interest is in Bank One. Bank One loans money to IBM. Now, as long as it's not a material amount of their business, and usually for banks, it's not. You're talking about, they usually, Bank One, I'm sure, has hundreds of billions of dollars worth of whatever, and whatever they loan to IBM, I'm sure is not, it's not going to be a significant overall compared to the rest, but it's indirect. So as long as it's indirect and immaterial, it's okay. So you can buy into Bank One, even though Bank One lends money to IBM, it's probably immaterial, and you can do that, right? So indirect has to be immaterial. So direct is a no-no. Indirect needs to be is okay as long as it's immaterial. Okay, so these are probably the two most common ones you'll see. Okay, let's look at the cases. Gina is a member of the audit engagement team. She owns 5 shares of IBM stock. The ownership is immaterial to Gina. Okay, so is Gina a covered member? Gotta go up here. Give me 1 second. What was she? Doesn't say. It says she's a member of the audit engagement team. Is she a covered member?
Yes.
Yep. She's a covered member. She's a member of the audit engagement team. She's a covered member. She has to follow the rules. Hey, what's a bull? Okay. Is it a direct or indirect interest? Is there any mutual fund or bank in between there? Anyone?
Is direct interest?
That's right.
Direct interest?
Yep, the direct interest. And we can actually stop right here. Why? They say it's immaterial. We can highlight that, I guess, but truthfully, this doesn't even matter. We could actually stop at covered member direct interest. Is Gene in violation of the rules?
Yes.
Yep. You cannot have any interest. Doesn't matter whether it's material or immaterial. So if it's direct, no material interest, no interest period. Only if it's indirect can you have an immaterial interest. So you can never have a material interest, but if it's indirect, you can. Okay. Greg is a member of the audit engagement team. He has an investment in a Standard & Poor's 500 fund. Because IBM is in the Standard & Poor's 500 fund, the mutual fund has a direct interest. Okay, so the mutual fund has the direct interest, but Greg doesn't. So this is well, first of all, is Greg a covered member?
Yes.
Yep. On the audit engagement team, covered member. Is this a direct or indirect investment?
Indirect.
Indirect, good, yep. So Greg buys into the fund buys into material or immaterial? So IBM is one of the companies, so there's 499 other companies. It'd be very unlikely that any change in IBM could do too much to the Standard & Poor's 500 fund. Right. I mean, there's, even if they had a really good year or a really bad year, there's 499 other companies. It probably doesn't really matter too much. So would this be a material or immaterial? What do you think? You guys are toying with me, I can tell. There's 499 other companies, so it's probably immaterial to the fund. Whatever happens to IBM is probably not that. It's not going to change the fund very much, if at all. So, is Greg in violation?
No.
Nope. It's indirect and it's immaterial. What did I just do? Hold on. That's what the evil me would have done. Wait 1 second. I got it. Okay. Is he in violation? No. All right. Helen is not a member of the audit engagement team for IBM. However, she is a senior auditor in the engagement office. So Helen's a senior. She is in the office, the engagement office. She owns 500 shares of IBM stock. This investment is material to Helen. Okay, so let's go up here. So Helen is not on the engagement team, but she is a senior auditor. Okay, is Helen a covered member? So she's not on the engagement team. but she's a senior. Is she a covered member?
No,
Good. No. The only the seniors that are going to be covered members are going to be the ones that are on the audit itself. If she's not, you know, like, so this could be, we'll put this as Helen. I don't know who it is, but we'll say that this is Helen. There are two L's in Helen. There's one. Okay, so if this was Helen, she is not a covered member. Not a covered member. The interest, is it direct or indirect?
direct.
It's direct. And they tell us it's material. Oops. Is Helen in violation of the dependence rules?
No,
Nope, very good. She is not a covered member. Doesn't have to follow the rules. There are some other rules that we have to follow, but this would not qualify. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, she's not a covered member. She is not governed by the covered member rules. Okay. So let's go to the next one. And immediate family members. Immediate family members. These are spouses, spousal equivalents, and dependent children. So basically what we're talking about here are spousal equivalents. It could be boyfriends, could, whatever it is, girlfriends, dependent children. Does it say independent children? Are considered to be the covered member. Oops. So basically anyone you see when you go home at night, they are going to be considered to be the same as the covered member themselves. I'm not sure why I have these here. These would be the same pretty much. And this one, there are these international rules. I think I could talk about these later on. Give me 1 second. I want to check and see if yeah. I don't know why I put that there. It's true that we have these rules, but I must have had these at some point together. All right. Please forgive my sloppy handout here. You know, I thought I had this handout worked out too. All right. So immediate family members, and this is to get, kind of get away from that, okay, I have this IBM stack. I'll give it to my kid, right? if I give it to my kid, then it's not me. Or I'll give it to my, boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is. It's to kind of close up that loophole that have someone else in the family that has it. Okay, so they are considered to be the same as. Okay, Sharon is a member of the audit engagement team. Okay, so I'm just going to jump ahead. We know that if they're in the audit engagement team, that they are going to be a covered member. She does not own any shares of IBM stock, but her husband owns 100 shares of IBM stock. Okay, now notice the husband is going to be a spouse, and it's considered the same as Sharon. So is the interest direct or indirect?
Direct.
It's direct. Yep. And at this point, we can just stop. It's probably material. 10,000 shares of IBM stock, you're probably talking about, into the millions of dollars. But is he in violation of the rules? Yeah. And this is exactly what those rules are there for, to avoid the situation. And notice that, whatever they do on the audit engagement, it could affect her husband's shares of stock. If you give a bad audit report to IBM, it could change the value of significantly change the value of the stock. So the one thing you want to avoid, by the way, and just to kind of get back to why we're doing this for independence, is that we give credibility to the financial statements. You don't want it to come out to say, okay, well, these people, they signed off on this report, but they all had, they all had interest in the company. It diminishes that credibility, and quite the opposite. It could, even, turn it into a fiasco. So that's why we're very diligent about this kind of stuff. That we cannot ruin that credibility. The only thing we give is credibility, and so any even appearance of it, it must be, the independence must be in fact and in appearance. It could be that maybe you own IBM stock and you say, you know what, I own IBM stock and I'm gonna make sure that they do those financial statements right because I'm gonna own some of their stock and I want to make sure that they're on the up and up and blah blah blah. So maybe in fact you are independent even though you own their stock, but the appearance would be that you're not, and that you have a financial interest in this company and you have a financial interest in giving them a clean audit report. Okay. Steve is a member of the audit engagement team. I remember. He does not own any shares of IBM stock, but his dependent daughter owns an immaterial amount of IBM stock. Okay. Direct or indirect?
Direct.
Direct. Dependent child? Direct. Same as the covered member. And we can stop right here, even though it is immaterial, we can stop right here. Is Steve in violation of the rules? Yep. You cannot own a single share of IBM stock. It doesn't matter whether it's material or immaterial or not. It's okay. Jolene is a member of the audit engagement team. Covered member. She does not own any shares of IBM stock, but her husband has a large investment in a technology fund. Okay, direct or indirect?
Direct.
Probably indirect. This is a fund. It up. Because this is a fund, it's probably going to be indirect. However, they tell us that 40% of the fund has IBM stock. You got a large investment, and of that large investment, 40% of it is an IBM stock. Is that likely to be material or immaterial? And this is a judgment call. There's not going to be a one, but what do you think? There's 40% of it. They say it's a large investment, and 40% of it's an IBM stock.
Material?
Yeah, probably material. You know, because you think about this, if something happens at IBM, it's really going to change that fund. You know, notice the difference between a 500 or a 100 fund where there's a bunch of other companies in there. This is 40% of it is a pretty big swing. So yeah, is Joan in violation of independence rules? Yes. You can have indirect interest as long as it's immaterial. If it is material, it's a no-no. Okay. I think I'm going to stop here. Let's stop here. Anyway, if you get too much of these rules, they start to all blur. Oops, don't do that. So we'll stop here. And we'll go to something else. Let's go to the sampling. Okay, so sampling. Let's go. We have a sampling. Yeah, sampling's in there. Okay. Yeah, you know, and this ethics stuff. I mean, it's it's pretty. You know, it's this, but not that. It's, you know, if you get too much of that, it just all runs together. So we'll stop there. So basically, if you are a covered member or your family's a part of your immediate family, spousal equivalents, dependent children, in other words, children living with you, that those people are considered to be the same as the covered member themselves. So all the same rules that apply to the covered member apply to those people as well. And going through the covered member themselves, the covered member is basically an extension of those. So you can't have any direct financial interest. You can have indirect as long as it's immaterial. So those are really the two basic rules. Covered members, we talked about, they're in their immediate family, whoever they see when they go home at night, you know, spouses, kids, whatever, you know, so those are considered to be the same, and they cannot have any direct financial interest. One share of stock, you're not independent. They can have indirect as long as it's not material. If the portion of the fund or whatever is not material, or if they have an investment in the bank, that the bank's loans to these are not material. And usually banks are pretty good at managing risk. So they usually don't, they usually have requirements that they don't be material. I built the wrong thing here. Okay. All right. And you cannot see what I'm doing. Now you can. All right. Classical sampling. So we're going to start into sampling. And sampling, the idea behind sampling is, you guys probably already know this, but you take a small group and figure out what the characteristics are of that, and then you project it over the population as a whole. So we're going to take a small group of transactions usually, or accounts, and project those over the entire population, or as the entire book value of whatever the account is. But this is exactly the same as you do for anything else. If you have a new medicine, there's 8 billion people on the planet. If you get to come out with a new medicine, you can't test it on all 8 billion people. What you do is you take a small group, you see how they do, maybe take a couple of groups or whatever, and then you project, okay, it was effective for 46% of the people. We project the population as a whole, it'll be effective on 46% of the people, or whatever, the projection is. So you're taking a small group and then projecting it on the population as a whole. In this case, it's going to be on our on the book values. So we're going to want to see if these book values are how accurate they are. Okay, so here we have what are these? Accounts receivable. Okay, so we have these accounts receivable, and here's all the book values of them. These accounts receivable. I think on the following page they tell us that these all add up to 200,000. So they have these 200,000 worth of book accounts receivable, and we want to see if how accurate that is. How do we believe that these are? Now, these are the audit amounts. These are the amounts that would be if you audited each one of them. We're not going to do that. We don't audit each one, but we will. If we do pick one of these, this will be the audit amount compared to the book value. Okay, so we're going to take 5 of them. Now, the first thing we have to do is figure out which ones to pick. And they're going to tell us we're going to use the first 2 columns of the random number table at the bottom of the page to choose a sample of 5 accounts receivable. Okay. So we got these numbered 1 through 30. So the random number table, we're going to take the first 2 columns. Right? And we come up with 03. Is there a 3 on our group of accounts? Yep, right there. That's going to be the first one we pick. I wish I had what I should do is make this on the side. Maybe do this one or something. It's not going to help you guys, but future you'll have some comfort knowing that future generations will. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight these. So these are the first 2 columns we're using. Okay, so there are an 03 we had. Is there a number 46? Anyone?
No.
Nope. Is there a 51?
Nope.
Nope. 32?
No.
11.
Yes.
Finally. Okay, so 11, we'll pick number 11. That's going to be our second one we pick. 14?
Yes.
18? We do have an 18, so we'll pick that one too. 91. Nope. 28. We do. And that's 5, right? 1, 2, 3,
That's fine.
5. Okay. So what we're going to do now is take these. So these 5 are we're going to. So here's what happened. We picked the 5, and we're going to take those 5 and project it over the population as a whole. Now we pick them randomly. the random number table. We use the first two digits to pick them randomly. And by the way, I'm sure you guys probably know this, but why do we pick random samples? They usually are the best indicator of the population as a whole. So we look for things that, we try to pick a random sample because that is usually going to give us the best estimate of what the population of the whole is. Now, there is something weird about auditing, not weird, but everything you do in auditing must be repeatable with the same results. So notice if we just said randomly pick 5 items, someone might pick, certain 5, and someone might pick a different 5. When you do an audit, you must have some way of doing it, of picking the random sample that can be repeatable. In other words, I'll pick a random sample of 5 items. When you come and check my work, you're going to use the same table, you're going to use the same digits, you're going to pick the same 5 items, unless I did something wrong. You're going to pick the same items that I picked. So it must be repeatable, even though this is random items that are picked. Anyone coming in can follow those directions and pick the same random 5 items. So that's why we use random number tables often, because it must be repeatable. People say, well, you can just have your computer pick 5 random. You can. The problem with that is somebody else comes in and unless I guess if you printed out whatever you use, they could use that. But someone else coming in, if they just did a random, pick 5 random, they might pick 5 random different ones. So we need to have the same ones. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these down. I think we can just copy and paste these. I'm not positive, but let's give it a shot. Hey, look at that. Okay, so we picked 3, we picked 11. We picked 12. No, we didn't. No, we did. So these are the 5 items that we have for our sample. And what we're going to do is we're going to total these. We got to find the average. So we have to total these. I could cut and paste it. Well, don't do that, Mark. I gotta add these up. Ooh. Hopefully that works for the other one too. I think that 16. 32. That's probably pretty close. Okay, and this one, the same thing. It's 1600. That's 400. Okay, yeah. I think that's right. Okay, so 33,795. 32,395. Okay, so these are the totals. So how do we get the average?
Divide the totals by 5.
Yep. And I'm going to cheat again and do it over here. So 67, 59. $64.79. Okay, so these are going to be the averages. So the book average is 67.59. And the audit average is 64.79. Check those and make sure they're right. One more time. 67.59, 67.59, 64.79. Okay, I think those are right. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to copy these down here. So now we came up with our book average and our audit average. So this is what the client says. This is for the client. So this is, we're going to check on these numbers that they have. And these are the auditors. So the client says that it's 67.59, the auditors say it's 64.79. Okay, so we're going to have a few different ways we can do it. So we have our averages for our samples. And now we're going to project it out over the population as a whole. Just like we do for the medicine, we have a few, that we test people on, and then we project it over the population, the entire human population. We do the same thing for this. We're going to take our 5 items and project it over the entire 30 items, the entire $200,000 worth of accounts receivable. So now we're going to take those and project it over. And there's 3 different ways we're going to do it. And the first way is the mean per unit, and mean is just the average. Sometimes you actually see this called average per unit. So mean per unit, average per unit. Now, we have 2 different averages here. We have the audit average and the book average, or the client's average. Which of these numbers are more persuasive to us? Which one of these numbers are better? The ones that the client gave us, or the ones that we figured out for ourselves?
The auditors.
Yep, good. Yeah, our numbers, and by the way, this is true for all of auditing. What you come up with is more persuasive than what the client does. So whenever you have 2 different things, what you came up with and what the client does, the more persuasive is the one that you know for yourself. The one that you actually did yourself is more persuasive. Why? Because you know exactly how it was done. So yours is always more persuasive than what the client said. Okay, so we're going to take the audit average. 64.79. I'll write it in. That's be easier. 64.79. Number of items in the population. We have 30 accounts. So here's what we're saying. Okay, you have 30 accounts. We're saying our average came out to 64.79. You have 30 of them. All of them should be that 64 79. So this will be our projected value for the population. $194,370. So this will be our projected value. This is what we think that this is what we think that the accounts receivable are actually worth. The total book value that they show is 200,000. Okay, so our projected misstatement is how much? It's a question I don't know the answer to. 5,630. You want to check that? Okay, so we're saying that their books are worth 194,370. They're saying it's worth 200,000. This projected misstatement, is this an understatement or an overstatement? Do something. So the projected value,
Hey, Professor, a quick question. Where'd you get 5630 on project misstatement?
subtracting. So
Oh,
take
okay.
200,000. So how much are these different by? You know, this is kind of the difference.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Ah. All right. Yeah, I'll put a minus in here, I guess. We'll do that. Okay. All right, so this is, we're saying that these are, the difference between these two is 5,630. Now, we're saying it's worth 194. They're saying it's worth 200,000. So this 200,000, is this overstated or understated?
Overstated?
Yep. Yeah, we're saying their books are overstated by 5,630. Now, whether that's material or not, I don't know. That's a judgment call. The CPA exam, they will never ask you for judgment calls. So they're not going to ask you, is this material or not? But you would have to decide whether that's material. Now, everyone should get the same number of the 5,630 is repeatable, but the judgment may be different. Someone may say that's material, someone else may say it's not. If you decided it was material, what you do is tell the client, look, you need to write this down by 5,000, some number I forgot already. So, you know, if you thought it was material, you would tell the client and hopefully they would make the adjustment. 5,630. Okay, so that is the mean per unit and kind of called the average per unit, and we just use the audit average, whatever the audit average was. Okay, ratio. Ratio says that things are off by a ratio. What's a good way of saying this? It's like this: large things are off by large amounts, small things are off by small amounts. And that usually does make sense. Okay, so for instance, if you had a $60,000 account and it was off by $600, okay, that seems kind of reasonable. If you had a $60 account that was off by $600, that usually doesn't happen. Right? I mean, so large things, large errors, small things, small errors. There's a ratio of errors. So that's what kind of ratio estimation is. Okay, so we take the audit over the book. So the audit is 64.79. And the book is 67.59. And we're going to multiply that by the total book value. And the total book value is 200,000. So we're saying everything is off in that book value, that 200,000 book value, everything is off by the same ratio. Big things are off by bigger amounts, small things are off by smaller amounts, but the same ratio. That should be a comma, not a period. Okay. And let's see what that comes out to. That's not going to be a nice clean number, I don't think. Six, 759. I'm going to round off the nearest dollar. $191,715. Did you guys get that?
Yes.
Right, so this is our projected value. And again, I round off the nearest dollar. Okay, so let's see, we have our total book value is 200,000. Our projected value is 191,715. I'm going to subtract that and get a difference here. $8,285. Oops. Okay. So we're saying their books are worth that the accounts receivable for this method is worth 191,715. They're saying it's worth 200,000. So is this an overstatement or an understatement?
Overstatement?
Yep, they're overstating it by 8,285. That's an overstatement. Okay. Difference estimation. Difference estimation is probably the quirkiest of them, of all of them. And it's quirky for a couple of reasons. It basically says everything's off by the same amount. So a $60,000 account will be off by the same amount as a $60 account. It's saying that they'll be off by the same amount. Usually it's when there is something like shipping or something like that that doesn't get added in or whatever it is. It's likely that it's going to be the same error no matter what size the account is. That's what difference estimation assumes. Okay, so let's see. We have the audit average minus the book average. Okay, so the audit average was 64.79. And let me do the book. What? I don't know. What did I do here? Who made this stupid handout? All right, so the audit average is 64.39. The book average is 67.59. So we're going to subtract out the book average. I'm going to check and make sure I did that right. 67.59, 67.59. Okay, so we're going to have with a difference here. Oops. $280. So what we're saying is that every one of their book average, every one of these is overstated by 280. So these are overstated. Wow. Okay. We're saying every single one of these is going to be overstated by that. It doesn't come out to be a negative number, but it'll be basically it's overstated. This is how much they would have to take out of it. So what's 30 times that? Whatever that is. 8,400. Okay, so this is the projected misstatement. Every one of these accounts is overstated by 280. And so we're going to tell them, look, you got to take 280 out of each of those accounts times 30. You got to take out 8. So this is overstated. The total book value is 200,000. Okay, now we have a problem. What is a projected value? We're saying their books are overstated by 8,400. So what would be the projected value? Anyone? So they're saying that their books are worth 200,000. We're saying that they are overstated by 8,400. So what would the projected value be? Again, we got to back into this one. It's a little bit trickier than the other ones.
$191,600.
Yep. Yeah, you have to subtract them. So this would be and this would basically be how we would get it would be the 200,000 minus the 8,400. So we would say that your books are really worth 191,600. Okay, we're gonna stop here. I tell you what, let's be back in what, I'm gonna cut it a little bit short. I'll say let's stop back at 7:25. That'll give us time to finish. Hopefully ahead of time. Oh, wait, I'm gonna do something. Let me save this. We're gonna do the Anthony case next. I'll leave this one up for a little bit. I'll say be back at I'm sorry for going a little long on this one before the break. Okay. Hello. Okay, so we're going to go see the next thing we're going to watch is the Anthony fraud video. It's a weird, um, it's a weird fraud. First of all, we'll talk about that later. But well, and one of the weird things is that my brother-in-law, Anthony, that you're going to actually see here, is he was involved in it, or he's involved with the company that was doing it. And you'll see him. He really wanted to talk to me about it. He's like, I got to talk to your class. I got to talk to your class. So this was actually recorded in a graduate class at a different college I was at. And he came in and he was supposed to talk for, I think, a half hour. I think he talked for the entire 2.5 hours of the class. This video the editing on it's pretty crude because I edited it years ago and it's been cut down and cut down and cut down. It's about 30 minutes now. Anyway, it's about him talking about what it was like. And one of the things that's weird about fraud is how it happens and how okay, we all know that there's bad people. We all have that cousin or something that you go, okay, well, say did they commit a fraud? Yeah, probably. But how do you get a bunch of people, smart people, and they do something really stupid? How do you do that? How does that happen? And that's kind of more the interesting thing. And then in this, I think this video, I think he actually describes it better than anything else I've ever seen about kind of how frauds happen. And he was there when it happened. So let's go ahead. I got to share screen. I got to do something here. Nice for video clip, I think. And let's see if
Sure. It's part of the story. I was answering an ad in a newspaper after I graduated from college and started off as low as you can start. They had probably 2,000 stores worldwide at that time, but just a few here in the U.S. They had just started. Started out as an assistant manager, became a manager, a district supervisor. They were growing fast. They needed young, energetic people, and ended up in their purchasing department, which was a great steady position, corporate level position, didn't have to move around, and was responsible for negotiating. At the end of my 16 years there, it was over $1 billion of merchandise a year, and I was one of many people there. It was a very large organization, which has only grown since I left. But it was privately held, and that's the key to one of the things I wanted to talk about today. I had my whole corporate experience in a privately held company. One family owned it. It's a company that managed its expenses very wisely, never spent an extra penny on anything they shouldn't be spending a penny on, and they bought product correctly. You could negotiate in good faith with vendors. They knew that what you agreed to verbally was going to happen, and very importantly, at the end of the day, that their invoices were going to be paid on time. If you agreed to pay $1 for a bottle of vegetable oil, that's what...
are you getting a strange echo on this or no?
No, it's good.
Okay.
You would get paid. You would always get paid on time. Aldi is a company that has operated that way and grown and been incredibly profitable doing that. The business model is very simple. Buy low, sell it at a fair price, hopefully lower than everybody else, and make your thin margin in the middle and grow off of that.
Decided that maybe you would leave there?
That's a very good question. One thing about Aldi is that they are so structured. There's a very clear corporate ladder that you climb. As an assistant manager in a store, you become a manager, then you become a district supervisor of 5 stores, and then you hit this director level. I had progressed through the first 3 up to the director level in about 5 years, which was about normal in those days as they were growing fast. Once I became a director of purchasing, I did that for 12 years, or 11 years, let's say. And the vice president that was over my department was the same age I was. There really wasn't much room for advancement for me at that point. So I could comfortably be a director for the rest of my life, always do the same thing I always did. In my late 30s, thinking if I'm ever going to make a change, that was the time. Got contacted out of the blue by a recruiter for Fleming, and they were serious. And the numbers they talked about were, they asked me what it would take, is what it got down to. So I could negotiate a salary that was very comparable to what I had, and one thing that I had never experienced. I mean, they were a publicly traded company. They offered me these things called stock options, and that was an incentive as well. Fleming stock was trading at about $11 a share at that time, and had good prospects to go up. And here I was, somebody that had worked in a publicly traded environment, very close knit, didn't talk to a lot of other retailers, and there was a real player out there, probably a Fortune 100 company at the time, billions of dollars in sales, easily 4 or 5 times the size of company that Aldi was, and they were serious. They had the right package, and also something that I had never experienced was a bonus. They would match his salary and offer a bonus. I was actually hired away to start a chain of stores very similar to Aldi. Originally, the purchasing office for this new chain of stores was going to be here in the Chicago area, so I got to stay here. When I originally negotiated, it didn't involve a move. I knew it could happen, but they allowed me the freedom to set up the corporate buying office for this little chain of stores anywhere we wanted. And fortunately, one of the executives responsible for this program at Fleming lived in the Chicago area. He wanted to stay also. So we set up an office in Northbrook, and I worked out of that office for a little over a year before it closed. It was a cost-cutting measure to close that and take all of the purchasing into their corporate office in Texas. And it was something that I always knew might happen, and it made sense. Fleming had actually moved its entire company, and this is significant later when you find out why people inside a large organization do what they do. Everybody from Fleming moved from the previous corporate headquarters in Oklahoma City to Lewisville, Texas. The whole company moved. They leased a huge warehouse space. It was like an industrial park, and it became the corporate office for Fleming. But everybody working for Fleming in 2001, 2002, until they went bankrupt in 2003, were located in Lewisville, Texas, and nobody was there originally. That's significant when you think of the pressure on people to produce numbers and why there were accounting lapses in the end that led to the downfall. The first meeting I had with Mark Hansen, and talk about why you would make a change, going from a little privately traded company, getting flown on a corporate jet down to have dinner with the CEO, and he's got this vision for a new store. And I asked him how he was going to fund this. I knew Fleming had a lot of debt, over $1 billion in debt, even though they were a large company. I said, how are you going to finance these new stores? He said, well, we've got $450 million in free cash flow. There's plenty of cash out there to open stores. I was very naive, I should have understood that anybody that's dipping into their free cash flow to fund new projects, not the best place to find the money. But there was a lot of money out there, and we did get 17 stores open. And again, they were going along well enough that they thought my services were better used managing all of the private label procurement for Fleming. The reason for that is that they said, well, how are these guys with 17 stores buying a lot of items for a lower cost than what Fleming, this $15 billion wholesaler, is buying for? How can this little group get lower cost than the large group? And it all comes down to that culture and business practices. I had learned at Aldi that you make your deal, you negotiate for the lowest everyday price you can. There's no funny money involved with that negotiation. Just get down to the lowest everyday cost you can. At Fleming, everything was funny money. You'd have an elevated list cost that you were charged for something. There would be all sorts of allowances that were negotiated below that list cost, and that's where they got in trouble. This gap between what the list cost was and what the true cost was and what it needed to be. It took a lot of energy for the buyers to negotiate that. It was a whole different mindset for them. So they said, look, the guys that are running Yes Less know how to handle private label. We're going to let them be vice presidents of private label for all of Fleming, and they'll buy for the whole wholesaler. So when I went down there, that's what my new position was, as vice president of private label. It was 2 weeks until as I'm sitting in meetings, these guys were not good business people. That gap between a list cost and what you actually pay got exaggerated, and these guys were masters at manipulating that so that a company could report earnings when it bought product instead of when it sold product. And that really is what led to Fleming's downfall. Here's the Wall Street Journal article from September 5th, and this is the last time I'll get something up. September 5th, 2002. It explains exactly what was going on with the vendors. It's a very accurate article because the main source was another vice president that worked several offices down from me. He left the company. He couldn't stomach it any longer. And he had an axe to grind, and a friend at the Wall Street Journal. And the information's 100% accurate. I have a lot of respect for the Wall Street Journal. It was a front page article, and it was 100% correct. The folks at Fleming and the culture there was that if you needed money to hit your earnings, you could always go back and deduct from the vendors. That was the mindset. Make a deduction. And from an accounting side, we had a controller in our group, and he would always sit there and shake his head and say, no, we can't do this, we can't do this. And somehow at the end of the day, you finally rework the language until it gets done and it gets booked. It's a few months after I got down there, Fleming signed up their biggest retail group ever. It was Kmart. Fleming supplied them all of the groceries and consumables in their stores, which is paper products, health and beauty care, soaps, detergents, things like that. A significant piece of business, about $3.5 billion as I recall. We negotiated for it. Had an internal project that nobody could talk about. They called it Project Blue, which everybody figured out as soon as you said the name from the old blue light specials. But they negotiated for that business, gave Kmart an incredible deal to supply them with all of those grocery products and consumables. My goal in that private label piece was now to make a program work with suppliers that could supply Kmart, could supply Fleming, and could supply the Fleming-owned retail group. All three, and the Fleming private label group. So we had to make everybody happy. Ice cream was a big deal. Ice cream is the largest frozen category. There's more dollar sales in ice cream than anything else in the frozen case at your grocery store. Well, our private label program was a mishmash. We had suppliers in different parts of the country, different labels all over the place. We needed to organize it, go to one supplier who could handle the business everywhere, negotiate the best deal, and make it work for everybody. What happened was Kemp's Marigold had the plant. They have enough plants in different spots in the nation they could supply everybody. They had great quality product, and they had a competitive cost. So we negotiated the deal. They also had incentive money. They had $3 million. They gave Kmart $1 million to make the change. You have to say no to your other suppliers and buy from them. They give Fleming Retail Group $1 million because now Kemp's/Marigold is the supplier for the Fleming Retail Group. And they gave $1 million to Fleming Corporate for their private label group. So we had $3 million out there. Now what happened was in the fourth quarter of 2002, our CEO was out there talking to Wall Street saying, here's what our earnings are going to be, 56 cents a share or whatever. That's a rough number. This is what we're going to earn this quarter. And he trots back into his executive suite and gets a handful of guys around him and says, now, look at our plan. What are we really going to earn? And they find it's maybe 20 cents a share. So there's a gap. How do you make up 30 cents a share, in a very short period of time and hit the projection that you've given Wall Street? If you don't hit it, that your stock's going to tank. And people will lose confidence in your company. Your credit can be downgraded. There's all sorts of negative things that happen when you don't hit your numbers. My response was always, well, let's be more careful with the numbers we give everybody. Nobody wanted to hear that. Our CEO was trying to turn this value company into a growth company, and he sent very aggressive numbers to Wall Street. So we had a gap. And what happens is Phil Murphy would come back from that meeting and say, okay, here's our part of what we have to fill. We need $30 million. Our group had to generate $30 million. So he goes, okay, there's about 12 of us in roles comparable to mine. What are all the deals you've got out there? And one of them that I put up on the list was, I said, well, we have this $3 million from Kemp's Marigold. It's a deal we've been working on for almost a year. the money's right here. I mean, it's cash. I mean, the money's there. But the question is, how do you account for that? If that's an incentive for a program that's happening now and in the future, how do you book that as income? And can you? The answer I was told 3 times was no. You can't book it as income. You have to take it as future earnings because it's for a program going forward. So Phil Murphy said, well, call it a rebate. Call it a rebate for business we've done best. We did a little business with Kemp's Marigold already. Not everywhere, but we had done some business with them. He said, just call it a rebate and have them sign a paper telling you it's a rebate. I'm like, well, that hasn't come up before. I don't know if that's right to do that. So I talked to the sales guy that I dealt with. Is this something we can do? His CFO got back to him and said, no, we really shouldn't do that. And after going back and forth, Phil Murphy desperately needing that money because he's got to walk back into the CEO and say, we've got you covered. We've got $30 million here that we can book as income and hit your earnings number. And at the end of the day, after going back and forth 3 or 4 times with our CFO, whose name is also on that, who is it? Shapiro? Mark Shapiro? Is he on top there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mark Shapiro was the chief financial officer. At the end of the day, I couldn't get it done. I said, look, everybody's telling me no. And I went to Phil and said, no, Phil, they're saying it can't be done. The money's there, but we can't book it now. So I'm done. And he said, just tell Shapiro to talk to Miracles about it. I said, well, okay. I said, they know something I don't, fine. So I had Mark Shapiro talk to Kemp's Marigold, their chief financial officer. The next thing I know, there's a letter in front of me signed by the CEO of Kemp's Marigold saying that this was some sort of rebate or something. And at the same time, their sales guy signed the agreement, the formal agreement, contract, that they were going to be our private label supplier. So, okay. I guess they knew something I didn't. Again, I was a year and a half, maybe 2 years out of working for a publicly traded company and never had to get involved with anything like that before. We'd always just negotiated and moved forward. And there was never any incentive money associated with any of the deals I had done before, but now there was. And this is the way they did business. I mean, this was normal, and it still goes on today. Super Value is the major wholesaler that does business this way, and CNS Wholesale, there are others. I don't mean, I'm sure most of what they do is above board, but there is potential for danger. I signed that agreement, and we booked that money, and they hit their earnings that year. And the sad part of it is those earnings are also linked to the incentive. I mean, the bonuses that all the executives got were only available if you hit a certain earnings number. So again, more incentive for people in a big organization to do whatever it takes to hit the number.
And your options also.
And options as well, I mean, because that's all linked to the stock price. So the factors that make it so tough, it's really like a boiler room at some point. And really, when Phil Murphy came down, he got the 12 people that controlled all the negotiations and locked us in a room a quarter the size of this one and said, we can't go out till we figure out how we're going to generate $30 million. I shouldn't say he locked it, but clearly if you left the room, you left your job, and after having just relocated your family, and again, everybody in the room had relocated their families to this area because the whole company had moved. And not only that, but when you move, Fleming was very generous with their relocation expenses. They had this executive relocation program. If you couldn't sell your house, this company would buy it for you and then sell it for whatever they could and take the loss. If you leave the company within a certain period of time, you had to reimburse them those relocation expenses. Tens of thousands of dollars that I would have to pay out of my pocket if I left. And the HR person said, how are you perceived as a buying group out there in the world with Procter & Gamble and these other vendors that you deal with, and with some of your contemporaries, your other person groups? How is the Fleming group perceived? And my statement was that we were pirates. I mean, we don't, a lot of fun to hang around, but the guys around me would cut your throat at the end of the day. One of the guys next to me came up with this brilliant idea that, well, there's going to be shared savings now. Now that the vendors don't have to go to Troy, Michigan to call on Kmart and Louisville, Texas to call on us, they're going to save money. We're going to be easier to deal with. The volume's going to be greater. They're going to save money. So they sent out a letter that said, "Congratulations, you're now selling to and working with this new larger company, larger purchasing organization. It's only going to cost you 3% of your total sales for the year." That's millions and millions of dollars, and hope for the best. We put enormous pressure on them. Yeah, we did over $1 billion in business with Kraft alone. One of the companies, obviously, that got fined is Kraft. I really feel sorry for the guy named Adams. You can read about him in the article. He was under enormous pressure because of the volume of business that they did with Fleming. Fleming was a very important customer to Kraft, $1 billion in sales. And if it meant signing a letter that $7 million or $10 million would get funneled to Fleming somehow over a couple of years, he signed it. There was still hope. I mean, when Kmart business came on, if everything happened the way the CEO wanted, it could have worked. I mean, look at what Sears did with Kmart. That worked when they just got together and made it work. But for us, it didn't. It just did not work. I could see it going bad. I was tired of being the company was using my credibility that I had worked hard for over 16 years with Aldi and doing clean business. They spent my credibility dealing with vendors now, where I would sit with somebody face to face at a desk and I couldn't tell them that everything was going to be handled. I couldn't tell them that their bills were going to be paid and that those deductions were going to be repaid. My word didn't mean anything to them anymore, and I wouldn't. I would just tell them, I said, "Look, we're all in trouble. This is not going to work. If you want to get those paid back, I don't think you're going to." What happens then is if they still want to do business, and that's a big if, it'll be at a higher cost. Whatever you're taking from them, they're going to add back to the top line cost because they have to make money at the end of the day. And it's a really vicious cycle that elevates the cost, makes Fleming uncompetitive in the marketplace, and at the end of the day, that $450 million in cash flow that Mark Hansen was so proud of, it went away because these vendors said, "We can't handle the deductions anymore. It's not working. We have to put you on cash in advance," and that's a death note for a company. As soon as you start having to pay for product before you receive it, your whole cash flow goes away. One of the yellow flags that went up early for me when I was running those 17 stores at Yes Less, the invoices went through the Fleming accounting system. They had a computer program that figured out how long they could stretch each vendor. I had no idea. Couldn't believe it. And it was really based on feedback. Well, how many days is it before this vendor will call me and ask for his money? Okay, it's due in 30 days, but I haven't paid in 45. When do I get that call from them? And they recorded it. Each time they would record, okay, so this person doesn't care until 45 days. So they would just never pay until 45 days. If you weren't sitting on top of them, things wouldn't get paid. So yeah, they definitely stretched that as far as they could. But you think about that, a $15 billion company, that's $41 million a day in business that you're doing. And that's literally what crushed them in the end. When you can't buy products because you need cash in advance and your customers are clamoring for it, you're out of business. And Fleming literally went out of business because of that.
Now, so they could have been profitable.
Absolutely, and they were for many years. I mean, Fleming's was a 100-year-old company that had grown through acquisition and been successful up until that lawsuit with David's, quite frankly. I mean, they hadn't made money for a few years, but when Hansen was there, they reported their first quarterly profit in 4 or 5 years. And yes, they could have made money the right way. But his vision was to not just have a value stock, not just to be one that languished out there and just was kind of safe and comfortable. He wanted growth. He had come from PetSmart, Sam's, fast-growing companies, and as we looked at his history, he kind of did this at those companies too, unfortunately. And he never learned his lesson. I think he's learned it now. I was very surprised. I was surprised that people beyond Jim Thatcher, Al Abood, and Phil Murphy weren't charged. I will say that Al Abood, who was right next to me and another vice president, the whole reason he was there was because he was better at taking that money than anybody I ever met. he actually worked for Kmart, did it there, got in trouble at Kmart too. And I was astonished one day when I came in and he was in the office next to me. I'm like, Al, why are you here? Well, Phil Murphy had hired him. He apparently did such a good job taking money at Kmart that Phil wanted him on our team. And that was another red flag for me to get out of there as quick as I could. Yeah, I wish I would have stood up on the CEO's desk and said, look, this is not right. It's not right what you're doing to your own people, number one, putting me in the position where I have to, again, spend my credibility to try to save face with vendors. And for the vendors who are our partners in business, we can't be in business without them for sure. We're destroying those relationships, and it's not right. But I can give you one specific example. You'll notice one of the companies that got fined there is Kemp's Marigold, a dairy. They got fined. The CEO got fined. Their chief financial officer got fined. Personally, they got fined, as well as the company, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. That was a deal I did. I was very upset about that. My resignation letter to Phil, I worded it carefully. I was an English major in college before I started working in the grocery business. And one of the things we use when we analyze poetry, we talk about the gap between appearance and reality when somebody wrote a poem. And to me, that's what I saw at Fleming, was this huge gap between the appearance that the CEO put out there and the reality of how the business was run every day. And I told Phil that I could no longer willingly suspend my disbelief in the way the company was being run. And that was true. I said, because you would sit around and look at each other and see the way you're doing business, just shake your head and say, I can't believe this, I can't believe it. And you have to willingly suspend that disbelief to operate in that environment, in that culture. Couldn't do that any longer. It's too obvious. I mean, the facts were too obvious. The business model was not working, at least not the way the CEO was describing it to Wall Street. That we're this big growth vehicle, we're going to be profitable. It was not. We were scraping for every penny. And another startup opportunity in New York became available. Once again, we could set our corporate buying office here in Chicago. So we got the team that put the Yes List stores, several of us back together to open another chain of stores in the Northeast. And I was excited about that. Negotiated a fair salary, no bonuses, no stock options, it was a private company, it's one guy. The document that none of you ever want to see again and ever want to see your name on is this. It's my subpoena from the SEC to testify. So pass that around and make sure you never see one again. But the bottom line is that it's very easy to testify in front of the SEC. You tell them everything that happened, exactly why it happened, don't leave out any details, and it is what it is. Unfortunately, a lot of my testimony led to huge fines for the guy that worked right next door to me. His name's Alaboud. Here's the SEC exchange, what they charged each of those guys with. But I reported to Phil. Alaboud was a vice president, just like I was. He worked right next to me. If you don't live it and feel it, and you would never know. You can read about it, but it overtakes your whole being at some point when you're right in the middle of all of that, and you see it kind of crashing down. So, like I say, at the end, it can make you stronger, and I certainly learned a lot. They also wanted to know a lot about the CEO. The one thing I'm truly amazed about is that Mark Hansen, the CEO, he hasn't been charged with anything. But it's very difficult, and I have sympathy for the SEC as they go after like the Ken Lays of the world, or Bernie Ebbers from WorldCom. It's very difficult because these CEOs never send an email. They have assistants, and they do everything in meetings, and it's all verbal. It's never taped. But the direction is completely clear. They walk into the meeting, they come out with their marching orders. Each senior person has to contribute a certain amount of money so he can hit the earnings that he's talking to Wall Street about. None of that is in writing, other than the notes that the guys take who were in the meeting. So I had to say, yes, when Phil came out at his meeting with Mark Hansen, this is what he came back to us with, that we need to make $30 million here to hit the number. What you really judge on is what you do and not what you say, which is right in some ways, but for a CEO who never does anything himself, he didn't sign any documents except Sarbanes-Oxley. When Sarbanes-Oxley came out, we were all, and it's an interesting sidelight, we were like, is he going to sign it? Is he going to sign it and say, yes, I believe all this information is 100% accurate? And he did. He did sign it. And I always thought that that would come back to haunt him, to say that to the best of my knowledge, all these numbers are accurate, everything's justified, when he knew in his heart anyway that it wasn't accurate, most of it was manufactured. And it's so interesting when I used to hear Ken Lay, who would just insist on his innocence, you know, and just think, you know, what we did wasn't wrong. Yes, we did all of that. Yes, we created these subsidiaries and put the debt all over there, but that wasn't wrong. It wasn't wrong. It's like they convinced themselves that what they're doing is right. When I listen to some and read some of the quotes that Mark gave to Wall Street, that, you know, the deductions that we have with vendors aren't out of line. It's in the Wall Street Journal article. It's not out of line with what the industry standards are. It's a certain percentage of sales. It's always like that with every wholesaler. They convince themselves that what they're doing is right, that it's okay, and that that's just the way of doing business. There's just some sort of a mental illness almost when it comes to that. And the CEOs get it sometimes. It was frightening to watch. But I walked away from big bonuses just doing what I did. Other guys that stayed, even a few months after I was there, I was 2 months away, I think, from like a full year's bonus, which for them, again, was too generous, almost 80% of the salary. I didn't want it. I mean, who would want that? So I wasn't going to stay long. And I would have continued to do what I was supposed to do, which was to put together the best deals for the company that I could. How they were accounted for, I did kind of mentally separate myself from that. I had to. I mean, all I could do is what I knew was right every day. Negotiate for the best quality products at the lowest price. Simple. That's what I'm there for. How you want to account for everything else, I just kind of washed my hands of it and said, take it from there and go. That's kind of the mode I was in right at the time I left, and I would have found something else at some point. That was not sustainable down there. The guy that had worked for Fleming for probably 27 years was a merchandise manager there, and he stayed right till the end. And you know, it was horrible for him and his family, knowing that this 27-year career he had, and probably his retirement, you know, account with the company, was all in jeopardy at that point. I mean, his wife actually had some mental problems, and she committed suicide the day they went bankrupt. It was really, really horrible. There are personal tragedies involved when things like this go on. It might have worked. If Fleming had ever purchased Kmart the way Sears just did, you know, maybe their stock would be $100 like Kmart's and Sears is right now. But that didn't happen.
Oops. Okay, so that is the Anthony video. It's it's one of those crazy things. An absolutely profitable company, 100-year-old company, billion-dollar company, multi-billion-dollar company that went bankrupt within months of the CEO giving a fictitious earnings estimate. One of the craziest things, you know, it didn't take like 5 years. It literally took, you know, you gave the estimate for the fourth quarter of 2002. They didn't make it to the fourth quarter of 2003. In October, they filed for bankruptcy. They ran out of cash. So it was very strange. A profitable company, a profitable, you know, billion-dollar company ran out of cash and went bankrupt in 9 months. And so, yeah, so it's kind of a strange one. So any questions on the handout of the, let me see something here. No, there's something wrong. Okay, any questions on the handout? By the way, there's a place to turn this in. So for the handout. I'll tell you one of the weird things about it too, though, is Anthony was never charged with anything. And he was never charged because luckily he never got that one paper signed that said that it was a rebate. Talk about dodging a bullet. You know, he tried to get, he tried to get them to sign this paper saying that it was a rebate. He couldn't do it. And you can tell it bothered him that he couldn't get it done, but talk about dumb luck. I mean, that's basically what saved him from being in with the other people. And there's another aspect to that. There was actually, this is much longer when you did it in person, but, he said, the people that would ask him about, did you know the fraud was going on? Like, yeah. They said, "But you should tell anyone." Like, who am I going to tell? My boss is the one doing it. I can't, who am I going to tell? And, nowadays there's whistleblower programs and stuff. You can call the SEC and different places. But, especially back then, there really wasn't anyone to talk to about it, to say, well, this is going badly. Any questions on that? These are sleeping. You can tell. Any questions on any of the handout? Okay, well, there is a place to drop the handout in. Make sure I'm in line view. Yeah, so there is the Anthony case. Yeah, so you can turn that one in. Hold on to the chapter 3 and the sampling one. We'll turn that in a different day. Any questions? Okay, so you can. Okay, well, you turn in the Anthony handout, and that will be it for this week. And we'll pick up next week. I don't know if we'll finish the chapter 3. We should finish we'll probably finish the classical sampling one next week. But the chapter 3 one, I'll see how long it takes. We'll worry about that next week. Any questions? Okay.
Professor, I'll not be able to attend next week class,
Okay.
but I'll submit my homework later. I told you I'm going on a different country.
Yeah. And the video will be up. I also I'll be up by the next day, but usually I can get it up for the same day.
Okay, thank you.
You can watch the video. Any other questions? Okay. Was there a question?
Oh my God, that was my dog. I'm so sorry. I do have a question. Princess, relax. Oh my God, excuse me 1 second. Princess. God. Anyway, is there any way that I can rewatch this video? I didn't, I missed a couple questions.
Yeah, you can also talk about the question if there's any, but the video will be posted. It'll be posted like at you can usually get it in by like midnight, so it'll be ready tomorrow. But yeah, it'll be posted.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'll call it a night, and I went 3 minutes over. I'll make it back to you guys next week. Okay, have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you. See you next week.
Good
Thank
night.
Good night.
Good evening.
Yeah.